Annyeonghaseyo, and welcome to day 3 of our Asian history. Today we're just going to do a little bit of language and then we're going to go right into our top 8 in Korean history. First, I want to teach you how to bow in the old way in Korea. So first of all, remember if you were in the palace, you hid your hands underneath that lapel. So you didn't get to use your hands. And like in most cultures, if a king walked in or a queen, you had to show you were beneath them. Well, in Korea, you had to actually put your head on the ground and you couldn't show your hands. So I want you to try this with me, all right? First of all, to bow, let me show you this first. You put your hands on your sides and you just bow and you say, Annyeonghaseyo, Annyeonghaseyo, okay? All right, now in the old day, if a king was walking in, put your hands on your belly. Okay, I'm going to change the camera. You can see this. Okay, so now you got to get to your knees without using your hands. Oh, so hard for an old lady. Sit on one of your butt cheeks sideways, okay, without using your hands, and then put your head on the ground. That is what you did in Korea. And then you got up while you were without using your hands, and that's how she did it. Woo, tough stuff. Okay. So let's talk about language a little bit. So to say hello, we said annyeonghaseyo. In order to say goodbye in Korean, it's almost exactly the same except you add he in the middle. So it goes annyeonghaseyo, annyeonghaseyo. And then, of course, to say thank you, you would say 감사합니다, 감사합니다. Try that, 감사합니다. Kind of a fun word, right? Okay, so now let's go ahead and go into our top 8. Hopefully you've done your Wiser Part 2 of our history in Japan. And we just talked about Shinzo Abe. And we're going into Korea's top 8 events in history. Let me make sure you got everything you can see. There we go. There we go. Okay, because I got to use the map a little bit today too. All right, let's look at the top 8 here. All right, so the first event in Korean history is the Russo-Japanese War. Now, can you guess what Russo stands for? Russian, you're right. Japanese, Japan. So this is a fight between Russia and Japan, 1904 to 1905. And guess who they're fighting over? Our little tiny Korea again. Yes. So again, the question is, why are they fighting over Korea? Now, also this time, they're also fighting over Manchuria up here in China as well. So all of this area. Couple of reasons why they're fighting. Again, they're still using this as a buffer zone. So if someone's attacking, they can fight here instead of in their homeland. Okay. Secondly, Korea's still got coal and iron ore, and you need those things for your ships and for your trains. That's how we're moving our people back in that day. Third, Japan wants to keep their control over Korea, of course. But fourth, what did I tell you about Russia? Anytime Russia's fighting, it's usually over a warm water port, right? Because all of their ports are so far north that they freeze in the winter, which shuts down your navy and your trade, right? So they're fighting over a warm water port, okay? Here, let's take a look at our numbers. Russia had 500,000, Japan had 300,000. So who was outnumbered? Japan was outnumbered again. Casualties, Russia had anywhere from 40 to 70,000. Didn't keep track very well. Japan had 80,000. That also included those with disease. And notice China also lost civilians in this fight because they were caught in the crossfire here. Kind of sad. So you'll see that Japan lost more people in this case, right? Interesting. This is actually a Japanese political cartoon. This is Tsar Nicholas, and it's called His Walking Wounded Return from This War. What do you notice about his wounded in the cartoon? Their heads are replaced by things like a train engine, a ship, a cannon, an electric pole, right? So what is this saying? Can you guess? Russia lost because they didn't have technology. They didn't have all the technology that Japan did. So we're already seeing Japan is becoming powerful because of the things they invent and they use. They become westernized. Good. So as a result, Russia lost. They signed the Treaty of Portsmouth, which actually was negotiated through Teddy Roosevelt, one of our presidents. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, although he was not physically there. Russia agreed to give up Manchuria in China, and Korea was given to Japan. It was annexed as a territory in 1910. Why is this important to our history? Why do we need to know this? The world is shocked. Again, tiny little Japan, an island, has beaten Russia, which is huge, huge, gigantic. Tons more soldiers, tons more people. Japan even lost more soldiers, and they still won. So it solidifies this idea that Japan is powerful, and they will remain powerful until the end of World War II as a military power. Okay. Now here's the part of the story we're missing. Russia, number one, goes into revolution because of this loss. We studied the Russian Revolution, so you know what we're talking about. But here's the part that no one talks about. Who stands up for Korea? Nobody. Not even the U.S., which is interesting because we usually do things like that. Well, we found out later why. There was a top secret meeting that came out much later. It came out, this was called the Taft-Katsura Agreement of 1905. What happened in the U.S. and Japan secretly met, and they signed an agreement and said, all right, Japan, you can keep Korea as long as the United States can take control of the Philippines. So we basically traded Korean people's freedom so that we could control the Philippines. Kind of sad. When I went to Korea, this is something that I just don't think we hear about in our textbooks or hear about in history, but the Japanese put the Korean people into concentration camps all over. There are 30 of these camps throughout Korea, and I never knew. I had no idea. These were all the different prison cells and the places that they tortured people. And this went on, by the way, from 1910 all the way through World War II, 1945. I was in this area in the museum where they were showing different ways that they tortured people, and I started taking pictures, and then I looked around and realized I was the only American in this place. And here I was taking pictures of the horrible things that they did to these people, and I just felt wrong, you know? Here are just a few things, but there were much, much worse, let me just tell you. This was a box about the size of 2 desks put together, okay? And you'll see it had, iron spikes on all the sides except for one in the box that you sat on. And then they would question you, and if you didn't give the answer that they wanted, they would roll the box so that it would impale you on all sides, and you would basically bleed to death. This was kind of like your lockers, a little bit bigger. They were made out of wood, and they would intentionally pick a locker that was smaller than you, and they would put you in there for days so that you would be like this, and your head would be like this, your legs would be bent. And so by the time you got out of there, your spine couldn't stay straight. Your legs and arms were damaged. It was a horrible way to be tortured. A lot of other really bad things too that I can't talk about. This room here, they would not allow pictures for good reason. They would take them into the front of this camp, and they would basically put them in front of a judge, and then they would take them behind here, and they would hang them right behind the judge's table. And then they would sneak the bodies out this way because they didn't want the people in the camp to rebel or panic. They just knew people would disappear, and they didn't know where they went. They assumed that maybe they went to a different camp or something, but they were killing them in this place. This room really hit me. These are all IDs, because you had to carry ID when you were controlled by the Japanese. These are all the people they killed in just this camp alone. And if you look, these aren't like scary people. These are women, mothers, grandmas, 5-year-old kid. What did a 5-year-old kid do to be a threat to this government? And they have pictures of them all over here. What's sad about this is no one has ever really apologized for this. And there's been a demand that this should happen, and it has not happened yet. Number 3 event, World War II. All 3 of our countries were involved in World War II. Interestingly, China calls World War II the War of Resistance against Japan. Because remember, Japan invaded China, right? The Japanese and the Koreans fought against the Chinese. So remember, Japan invaded China, and then they forced the Koreans to fight with them. So they would basically have a third of their unit were Korean, and then 2/3 were Japanese, and they would force them to attack China. All three had horrible losses in this war. So the question then, let's answer these questions. Number one, why did Japan invade China? What did China have that they wanted so much? Okay, so think, here's China, here's Korea, and then Japan's down here, right? It's an island. Yeah, they want land. They want land. This huge China, they want land. Secondly, they want oil. And there's not a lot of oil on a tiny little island. And everything is starting to be run by oil now, right? It's the 1940s. So they know that they need all of this. And basically, here's what happened. The United States was allies with China, and they said, you need to get out of China. And they said, we can't. And they said, well, if you can't, we're going to take action. So we basically blockaded Japan. We basically cut off all their supply from any of their trading partners, anything, and wouldn't let anything in. So the Japanese knew that either they had to pull out of China or they had to do something against America because they were going to run out of oil within a couple months. And they wouldn't have any tanks, any planes, nothing would run because they would have no oil. So we basically surrounded them. Why did they attack us? Because we blockaded them. So they decided to target where? Do you remember? World War II? They attacked Hawaii, right? They attacked Pearl Harbor. Why did they attack Pearl Harbor? Why Hawaii? Because it was supposedly where most of our naval ships were in the Pacific. In particular, our floating cities, our aircraft carriers were supposed to be there. Luckily, they were wrong, or we would have had a lot longer rehaul to get things back together. But they did some serious, serious damage. And at that point, I don't have a good map, but basically the Japanese had taken over every island up to this point in Hawaii. So all these islands in the Pacific were theirs. They were under their control. Okay? Take a look at some of the war deaths here. Now, first of all, if you look at the red, notice the red represents military deaths. So what are the top three? Number one is the Soviet Union. Number two is Germany. Number three is China. Great. Now look at the orange. The orange are civilian deaths. So which countries had the most civilian deaths? China, Soviet Union, and Poland would probably be the next one, wouldn't it? Yeah. So understand that they did horrible things in China. The Japanese did. You'll study that if you take tragedies with Mr. Anderson quite a bit. Okay. But notice the number of civilians killed compared to the military here, right? Another event that I learned about when I was in Korea that I had never learned about, Japan during World War II used what they called comfort women. And here's what they would do. Understand that you think you're protected in the U.S. by your parents. In Korea, they lived in kind of a little, it was fenced off, a little area. And they had little buildings within their house, but women were not allowed to leave that place until you were of age to marry, unless you were going to buy groceries with your mom in the market. They just didn't leave there unless they went to school. Well, during World War II, they told these ladies that they were going to go work in a factory for the war, because they had to. They were controlled by the Japanese. They took these ladies and they put them on buses. We're talking girls your age. And they put them in these houses right behind the front lines, and they allowed the soldiers to use them as prostitutes. And they raped those poor women over and over and over again. And unfortunately, when a lot of those women came back, especially in their culture where it's so traditional, and you're supposed to be a virgin until you're married, a lot of them were untouchable when they got home. They were used as sex slaves. This was not just in Korea. They did this in the Philippines, and in China, and Indonesia, and Taiwan. What I found interesting is when I was in Korea a few years ago, they were actually protesting this at that time. You'll see these older ladies are protesting, and what they're wanting is the Japanese government to admit that this happened, because no one has ever apologized or admitted that it happened. Well, I told you I like this guy, Shinzo Abe, the president of Japan in 2015. He did. He finally apologized. And he just basically said, I'm sorry for what happened to you. You know, because obviously he didn't do it, right? And then he agreed that they would pay the remaining victims $8.3 million. The sad part is, by that time, only 46 comfort women were still alive. But the point is that he did the right thing, you know. So, kind of an interesting story. The next event covers all three of our countries as well, and this is the Korean War, the 1950s. You're going to learn a lot about this in American history as well, or if you take America at War, we do a lot in the Korean War. Now, the Chinese call this the Great Victory of Liberation against the Americans, because remember, not only does North Korea not like us in this war, but China doesn't as well. So here's what happens. Remember, World War II has just ended, and we're trying to control the countries that lost the war. So our soldiers are in Japan trying to do policing there, right? Well, the Russians come into Korea to kick the Japanese out because the Japanese were controlling Korea, right? And while the Russians are there, they decide to take the northern half of Korea. The truth is, we still to this day don't know why they stopped at the 38th parallel. They probably could have taken the whole country at that point. But they stopped here and decided we're going to take this portion of Korea and make it our own. Well, that means then that the U.S. soldiers down in Japan here, they come rushing in to try to protect South Korea from this invasion. The U.S. comes in and they keep the southern half. There's a lot more detail to it. I'm kind of skipping a lot, but that's basically what happens. So basically, it's called a yo-yo war because we go back and forth over the DMZ or the 38th parallel. And eventually, our guys get pushed all the way down to Busan here. And so MacArthur leads a surprise attack. It was one of the most brilliant attacks of the war on Incheon right here. Never expected it because there were huge tides here. And if we came in at the wrong time, our Navy would have been decimated. They come in, they surprise their enemy, take Seoul, and not only that, they push the North Koreans all the way up to the northern border of the Yalu River. Well, what happens? The North Korean soldiers go over into China. And the president says, General MacArthur, don't you dare go into China. We have enough problems right now. We don't need to go to war against China. Trust me, we don't want it. But General MacArthur, I also get his opinion. He's like, my enemy is standing over that line. I can't go get him. So what does he do? He crosses the Yalu, basically attacks over the Yalu River. And as a result, over 100,000 Chinese soldiers come flooding in and just crush our boys. They get caught right here in what's called the Frozen Chosin. A few escape, and we pick them up by sea here and bring them back down. And then we get stuck on that 38th parallel by the end of the war. So that's kind of the summary of the war in a really quick amount of time. We also have recently found out, we always thought the North Koreans were using Soviet planes, the MiGs. You maybe heard of a MiG before. Well, we found out the Soviets didn't want them flying their planes, so these were Soviet pilots that were shooting at our boys in the Korean War. That was not admitted until more recently, actually. The Korean War is still officially not done. It ended in a ceasefire, so we agreed not to shoot at each other, but the war still technically exists today. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it's still stuck at the 38th parallel, as you know, and it cost the lives of over 2 million people. So I told you I got to go to Korea, and so I'm going to show you some pictures, okay? This is actually called Freedom Bridge. This is where they traded POWs, prisoners of war, and that's why the war took so long to end. We were trying to negotiate, but they had some of our prisoners that didn't want to come back to the United States. Some say they were brainwashed. Some say they just didn't want to come home. We had people like that wanted to stay in the United States and didn't want to go back to North Korea, and they were having a hard time dealing with that. But in the end, they traded prisoners right there. This is all along the DMZ, and you have to understand the DMZ is skinny and wide in different places. So it might go like this and like this, okay? So sometimes you can see across the DMZ, and sometimes it's wider than a lake, Okay, here are different fences between the two areas. There's kind of like a area in between them. It's like a no man's land kind of. Very sad. This is where a lot of families, the DMZ went up so quick that a lot of families were split from each other and have never been able to speak since. So these are letters to loved ones, pictures, stuff like that, just saying I miss you. And there's prayer ribbons all over the place. I'll show you that in just a minute. This was a train that was left in the DMZ during the Korean War. Remember, DMZ stands for Demilitarized Zone, meaning there's not supposed to be fighting there, which is kind of a joke when you think about it, because obviously, if you look, this has over 1,000 bullet holes in it. There was definitely a lot of fighting going on in the DMZ. These are the prayer ribbons I was talking about on the DMZ here, sending to their loved ones. What was interesting, I actually did something illegal. I didn't know it was illegal, but I heard something happening behind these ribbons. And I was taking pictures, and so I looked behind the ribbons, and I took a picture. This was one of the guard towers, and they were actually changing guards. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to take a picture of that, but I did, so naughty me. This is Panmunjom. John. This is right here, right along the DMZ, and when the North and South Korea meet, even today, to negotiate and talk, this is where they meet. So I'm standing on South Korean territory, and that is North Korea right over there. In fact, this is the line between the North and the South. And you'll notice there are guards out there all the time. This blue house is where they go and they meet. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. We were only given about 1 minute to take those pictures because they don't want anything to incite violence from either side. When I got my pictures back, I blew this one up. And I was a little surprised to see what I found. Do you see what's in the window? Somebody is either taking pictures of us or spying on us. But someone is obviously watching us, which kind of freaks me out. Wow. And a lot of times you'll see North Korean soldiers right here guarding on this side. So they're facing each other. It's very serious. Isn't it a joke? Like, I tried to get our tour guide, because he was a soldier, to laugh with us a little bit. Not even a smile. Very serious. This is actually in the blue house that we talked about there, where they would negotiate. So, like, when we met with North Korean leader, he would sit on the north side of this table. The table sits on the line between the two. The South Korean leaders or Americans sit on this side, and then they negotiate. In this picture, I'm actually standing in North Korea. I don't think you'd be allowed to do that today, but at that time, they allowed me to do that. Although I got in trouble because I found out you're not supposed to stand next to a soldier because you might take his gun, and I got yelled at. So these are lookouts on both sides, north and south. And a lot of the DMZ is beautiful land like this. It's actually gorgeous, and there's a lot of really beautiful birds and deer, although it is filled with landmines. So sometimes you'll see an animal with a missing leg or something, or you'll hear a boom. It's because of the landmines in the DMZ. Very hard to cross. This was our tour guide, like I said. That was the most of a smile I could get out of him there. Here you'll see, these are the guard stands all the way along the water here as well. Every mile or so, there's a guard stand. Number 5 event in Korea is democratization. 1987. This is like my high school years here. This is one of the most famous pictures. There was a protest going on. So here's what happened. They had a president who took over, and then this president decided he didn't want to leave. His name was President Park, and he claimed he's going to be king for life. And then somebody assassinates him. So they don't like that so much. There is a student rebellion. These are like college kids for the most part, high school kids. Several thousand students were killed in this particular protest. So in the 1980s, they agreed to finally having an election, having a democracy. Now in Korea, in South Korea, a president serves 5 years, but they are only allowed to serve 1 term because they saw what happened with President Park. He refused to leave, so they don't want any president to ever feel that way again. Number 6 event, I know it's going to sound crazy, but it's the Olympics. 1988, the Olympics were held in South Korea. And this is important because everybody saw Korea like the footage we saw in the Korean War. Black and white, country was torn up, killing each other, scary place. In fact, I remember when I visited Korea, people said, Mrs. Sturps, are you crazy? Are you afraid of dying? The truth is, they live their life just like we do. It's no big deal. On the DMZ, it's serious, absolutely, but everybody else has been this way for so long, it's nothing different to them. Well, when people came to the Olympics, they realized that Korea was a cool place. It was not scary. It was actually very modern, and they had a lot of cool technology. So it really made people realize that South Korea was like up to par, I guess. Take a look. This is the list of the 10 largest export items in 1961. And take a look how it's changed over the years by 2008. 61, they sold cuttlefish, graphite, rice, plywood, iron ore. 2008, notice what they're selling. Oil tankers, wireless communications, petroleum, electronics, automobiles, memory chips, parts of automobiles. They are like amazingly technological. I just couldn't believe it. I saw things there that had never even happened here yet that came like 5-10 years later. So they're very good at technology. Number 7 is actually the attacking on the DMZ, the tunnels that they built over the edge. So one of those attacks happened in 1968, and they tried to actually attack the capital. In South Korea, the capital is called Cheongwade, which means blue house, because it has a blue top. So it's called the Blue House, Cheongwade. Well, some North Koreans actually tunneled underneath the DMZ in these places, and kind of like in movies you might have seen, this SEAL team ran into a farmer and his son, and they had to decide whether to kill them or just tie them up. Well, they decided to tie them up. The farmer and his son got away, and they contacted Cheongwade, the capital, and said, hey, there's some North Koreans coming to kill you, and it foiled their plan. So that was a really big event in South Korean history. Since the 1960s, there have been 40 conflicts between North and South Korea, most of them ending in deaths. But we just don't hear about it because we don't live in Korea, so we don't hear about all these things that happen. Another attack. 1974, there was an assassination attempt on the president, President Park. He survived, but they killed his wife. So there's a lot of things going on in the DMZ that we don't always know about. These are just some examples of different things that have happened over the DMZ up to 2010. There obviously have been things since then. So I encourage you to look it up and check it out. There's a lot of stuff going on there that makes it. It is the most fortified line in the world. That's why we have a lot of American troops on that line. It's a very dangerous place. Absolutely. Here's some as well. Now, number 8 is obviously North Korea today. We're still dealing with Korea, aren't we? So if you look at their history, North Korea is extremely poor since the communist takeover. Food is a huge problem. In fact, that's why they have such a good army, because if you fight in the North Korean army, your family gets fed, and they need food. So they have quite an army. Well, if you remember, 2006, North Korea started test firing medium and long-range missiles, and that concerned us greatly because we don't get along always. At that time, they were led by Kim Jong-il, this leader right here, and he was communist, and he died. And then if you know, of course, his son took over, Kim Jong-un, this guy right here, okay? At first, Kim Jong-un seemed like he was going to be like a scary dude, and yes, a lot of threats. You know, we're going to nuke you, all kinds of stuff to the United States, a lot of political stuff going on. Obviously, a year ago, there was a discussion about ending the Korean War, which has not happened in years. So it was a step in the right direction. It didn't happen, but, you know, at least we're talking a little bit, which is maybe a good thing today, because obviously we want to end things there. But in the end, who's going to give in? They both want the other territory, and I don't know how they're going to negotiate that. That's a tough one. So interestingly, when I was in Korea, one of the things they said for years, South Korea wanted to unite with North Korea. They wanted to come and help their family members up there, their friends. Now, if you were to poll the people in South Korea, some of them would say no, because if the South takes in the North, their economy is so bad in the North, it would destroy the Southern economy. And right now, they're doing really well. So they're very worried about taking in a nation that's in that much trouble. So we'll have to see what happens. So to end today, this was actually a YouTube video that one of my students sent me that I thought you might enjoy. It's kind of funny. It's a little funny song about Korea and stuff like that. So enjoy it. And remember, we say annyeonghaseyo to say hello. To say goodbye, we say annyeonghaseyo. So annyeonghaseyo. See you later.